Since she was a little girl, Julia learned that life charges a high price from those born without privilege. Raised by a mother who worked as a janitor, she went to public school, took apart old fans out of curiosity, and delivered food to help pay the bills. Through hard work and persistence, she earned a spot in a technical course in mechatronics, even though she barely had a proper place to study. She did everything she could with what little she had, tutoring in the afternoons, food deliveries by motorcycle at night, and online classes during lunch on her phone. And still, when she finished the course, no one gave her a shot. She didn't have a big last name or the kind of look that fit in, until one day, during a regular delivery at a large factory, she noticed something no one else did. And right there, in that moment, between wires, arrogant stares, and a challenge that seemed out of reach, the biggest turning point of her life quietly began. But was the world ready to recognize the talent of someone who just wanted to be heard? It was supposed to be just another delivery. At least, that's what it looked like. Julia adjusted her red backpack as the factory gate opened with a metallic creak that sounded more like a warning than a welcome. With a steady gaze but a tight chest, she checked the delivery number on the app for the third time. Her hands were sweaty, not from the heat, but from days of exhaustion riding through the city. At 24, juggling scorching sun and surprise rainstorms, Julia had learned the meaning of a hard life the hard way. Still, every step was guided by something deeper, maybe faith, or maybe just the need to prove she could do more. The factory was huge, intimidating, surrounded by high walls and a kind of silence that shouted. Men rushed around with badges hanging from their necks, phones in hand, and impatient faces. Julia tried to blend into that environment, but it was hard. Her food delivery shirt was already soaked with sweat. Her worn sneakers told stories of miles walked, and her hair, tied back any way she could manage, said everything about how little time she had for herself. But her eyes, those sharp, steady eyes, missed nothing. That's how she caught the first sign that something wasn't right. A group of engineers stood around a silent machine, tools scattered around, faces tight with tension. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just the motor. She tried to ignore it. After all, she was there to drop off food, not fix problems meant for people with degrees. Still, she slowed down. One man was waving his arms angrily, another was on the phone, a third kicked the floor in frustration. Julia couldn't help it. She recognized that machine. During her mechatronics course, she had built a small version just like it. Long nights, cheap coffee, worn-out notebooks. The memory stung, because despite all that persistence, no one had ever given her a chance. Every resume she sent out, ignored. Calling it a hard life didn't even scratch the surface. It felt like screaming into the void. But something about that hallway pulled her in. A silent signal, a whispered challenge. The cafeteria was at the end of the hall. Julia dropped off the meals, got the signature, and turned to leave, but paused. Her eyes were drawn back to the machine. She stared at it for a few seconds and, calmly, noticed it. The wiring was wrong. The setup was off. From the looks of it, the frequency inverter was stuck between manual mode and remote control, causing the system to glitch. She bit her lip. It was as clear as day. But who was going to listen to her? A delivery girl with a sweaty backpack and no badge? Even so, she stood there for a moment longer, puzzled by how nobody seemed to notice what, to her, was so obvious. Is there a problem? The voice came out sharp. One of the engineers, tall and smug-looking, had noticed her standing there and curled his lip in disdain. Sorry, Julia replied, her voice steady but quiet. I just thought maybe the system stuck because the inverter's trying to run in remote mode while it's still set to local. That creates a conflict. The silence that followed was heavy. Two engineers exchanged looks. One gave a sarcastic little smirk. The other let out a huff. You work in maintenance? The first one asked, raising an eyebrow. No, sir. I took a technical course in mechatronics. Studied this exact model at a trade school. The reaction was familiar. That mix of disbelief and arrogance pretending to be humor. Oh, you're that smart? Then fix it, he snapped. The words hit like a slap, followed by muffled laughs. Julia's cheeks flushed. She didn't answer, just took a deep breath, the kind you take when you've learned to swallow pride, so it won't choke you. She turned to leave. But then came another voice. Firm, authoritative, yet oddly warm. Hold on. An elegant woman with flawless gray hair had just walked up. Her eyes settled on Julia with a kind of interest that no one else had shown. It was like, finally, someone was seeing past the wrinkled shirt and delivery bag. "What's your name?" she asked. "Julia." "Julia, what did you say about the machine?" Julia repeated her explanation, just as clearly as before. The woman, who soon introduced herself as Mrs. Eleanor, the company president, didn't waste time. "Someone check what she said," she ordered. When the tech stepped forward, punched a few keys on the panel, opened the diagnostic, and paused. Silence. "She's right," he said flatly. "Manual mode is locking up the system." Everything shifted. The chuckle stopped. The stares dropped to the floor. Suddenly, those name tags felt heavier around the necks of the men who'd mocked her. And Julia, still standing with her delivery backpack, looked 10 inches taller. It wasn't arrogance. It was the weight of survival finally being acknowledged. Mrs. Eleanor didn't take her eyes off her, as if she'd just discovered something valuable buried under factory dust. "So why aren't you working in this field, Julia?" She swallowed hard. So many answers crowded her throat that nothing came out at first. "Because no one ever gave me a chance," she murmured. And then silence. A different kind of silence. The kind that makes an entire factory hold its breath. But that moment wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something no one in that room, not even Julia, could have seen coming. Because when the truth rises from the bottom, it shakes the very foundations of the top. Now all eyes were on her. Not as a hero, not as a threat, but as a strange, misplaced piece of the puzzle. Standing there near the safety line, still with her backpack on, Julia faced a crowd of skeptical engineers, stunned technicians, and confused workers. The silence in the factory felt almost theatrical. Mrs. Eleanor, with the same calm yet commanding presence, crossed her arms and said, "Julia, explain it again. But this time, explain it like nobody here knows a thing." Julia took a deep breath. Her sweaty hands tightened around her backpack strap. She stepped forward. This was about more than just technical knowledge. It demanded courage. And that, Julia always had. She just never had someone who saw it. Without rushing, without dressing it up, Julia began explaining the system in the clearest way she could. She pointed at the control panel, showed the conflict in the activation mode, suggested clearing the error memory and reconfiguring the sensor. It felt like she was giving a lesson to students who didn't want to be in class. But she spoke calmly. She knew that system like she knew the back streets of the city. Every button was an intersection, every command a detour. As she spoke, one technician picked up a tablet and began following her guidance. Another climbed up the side of the machine. A third stood at the control panel, his brow furrowed. It was as if, little by little, they were being pulled, not by pride but by logic. Something stronger than ego was now running the room. Across the floor, Mark, the engineer who had mocked her earlier, stood quietly. But his eyes said it all. Disbelief, discomfort, maybe even fear. Julia didn't look at him. Her attention was locked on the machine. That was where she could finally prove, not to them, but to herself, that every bit of hard work, every sleepless night, every struggle of her difficult life was worth it. Mrs. Eleanor also said nothing. She simply watched, with the patience of someone who knows greatness is often trampled before it's allowed to bloom. Slowly, the technicians began running Julia's suggestions. First, they reconfigured the base. Then they performed a manual reset. And finally, they adjusted the sensor's safety logic. The panel beeped. A red light flashed. Then a second of tension. Another. And finally, the sound, mechanical, alive, like the machine was roaring back to life. It started turning, slowly at first, then with rhythm, then with power. The robotic arms moved. The conveyor belt slid forward. And the factory, silent for days, woke up like someone coming out of coma. The workers glanced at one another. One started clapping quietly. Another smiled with teary eyes. Mrs. Eleanor stood still, her expression unreadable, but there was a sparkle in her gaze. A sparkle Julia caught, even from across the room. She didn't raise her arms, didn't cheer. She just breathed deeply. Because this wasn't just about fixing a machine. This was a victory that words couldn't contain. Do you have any idea what you just did? Mrs. Eleanor asked, her voice gentler now. I just wanted to help, Julia replied, eyes still on the machine. I honestly thought no one would listen. And most people didn't, the president said, in a tone so honest it cut through everything. But I'm glad I did. It was like a crack of sunlight breaking into a dark room. And for the first time in a long time, Julia felt like she didn't need to hide. A younger technician walked up, clearly impressed. I never thought about it from that angle, he said genuinely. But it makes total sense. On the other side of the room, Mark quietly backed away. He avoided everyone's gaze. At that moment, the truth was like a mirror he wasn't ready to face. And Julia, without even knowing it, hadn't just opened up a machine. She had opened the eyes and minds of an entire team. Mrs. Eleanor, still watching Julia closely, made a subtle gesture. Stay a little longer. I'd like you to stick around for the tests. Julia hesitated. She wasn't used to being invited. She was used to being dismissed, ignored, overlooked. She didn't quite know what to do with the offer, but she nodded, took off her backpack, and set it down in a corner, then stood quietly, just observing. And as the tests began confirming what she had already suspected, something started shifting in the air. Respect. The kind that grows slowly but can't be stopped. It was like the faith she'd always carried deep inside. The kind nobody ever saw was finally becoming visible. And that quiet, steady faith, that's what had always kept her standing. Another technician called over. Julia, can you check this command line here? The sensor readings stuck. She stepped forward, typed a few commands into the tablet, and pointed. Right here, line 242. It's locked in a reading loop. You just need to clear the cache and restart. Simple, but only simple for someone who had studied. The tech shook his head, clearly impressed. And the most remarkable thing? There wasn't an ounce of arrogance in her tone. Julia wasn't trying to prove she was better than anyone. She just wanted to help. That was her persistence speaking. And there, surrounded by wires and code and cables, she wasn't just a delivery girl anymore. She was a technician. She was someone. And people were listening. The next few hours flew by. The technicians, once skeptical, were now following her suggestions closely. Floor workers came by to thank her. Younger engineers started asking questions. And in some corner of the room, Mark watched it all from a distance. He didn't say a word. And Julia, without even realizing it, was finally stepping into a space that years of emails and ignored resumes could never open. The machines were humming again, but something even bigger was moving now. Respect. Respect for someone who came from nothing, who used to show up with a helmet in one hand and tired eyes, but always brought truth with her. And the best part? She wasn't there to prove anything. She was just doing what she knew. As the shift wrapped up and the line ran smoothly again, Eleanor approached her. Julia, can I talk to you for a moment? Julia nodded. Her hands were still a little sweaty, her eyes glossy from the emotional whirlwind she was still processing. I want to take you to my office, Eleanor said. I want to hear your story. I want to know why someone like you doesn't already have a badge around here. And just like that, between humming machines and new looks of admiration, the next chapter began. One that, if Julia only knew, would bring revelations even she couldn't have dreamed of. The president's office was bright, spacious, and quiet. Nothing like the structured chaos of the factory floor. Everything there breathed calm and dignity. Tall windows let sunlight filter in gently. The furniture was clean and simple, and a small vase of white flowers added a soft, elegant scent. Julia stepped in slowly, still carrying her red backpack and the years of hard work that no one had ever really seen. She sat on the edge of the chair, tense shoulders, hands in her lap. She didn't know what to expect. Her whole body screamed that she didn't belong in a place like that. But Eleanor's eyes said otherwise. With a calm voice and a kind curiosity, she asked, Julia, tell me who you really are. Julia hesitated, like someone who had never been given the space to tell her story. She took a deep breath, trying to sort through memories and old wounds. My name's Julia Santos. I'm 24. I was born in a working-class neighborhood. It was just me and my mom. She worked as a cleaner. I always went to public school. Since I was little, I loved taking things apart. Fans, old irons, broken toys. My mom used to say I had hand for fixing things. She smiled a little shy. After high school, I got a scholarship for a technical course in mechatronics. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, and the hardest. I'd wake up early for class, give tutoring lessons in the afternoon, and make deliveries at night. I studied during breaks whenever I could squeeze it in. Eleanor listened without interrupting, just nodding slowly, absorbing every detail with genuine interest. Julia went on. I had one of the best grades in my class. But when I finished the course and started applying for jobs, I realized that wasn't enough. I sent out resumes to all kinds of companies, big ones, small ones, startups, international firms. Sometimes they'd call me in, but the minute they saw me walk in with a helmet in one hand and a sweaty shirt, their faces changed. Just like that. This hard life taught me a lot, including the fact that talent doesn't always open doors, and that sometimes a badge weighs more than effort. The president leaned forward slightly, her gaze tightening with emotion. They didn't see you, just the stereotype. Exactly, Julia replied, her voice catching in her throat. And still, I kept studying. I took online courses, watched classes on my phone while waiting for food orders to come through. I parked my bike near a bakery just to use their Wi-Fi and download materials. Some days, I delivered meals late because I was reading technical articles in the middle of the route. And why did you keep going? Eleanor asked. Because I still had faith that someday someone would really see me, even if just once. A deep silence fell across the room. The kind of silence that doesn't make you uncomfortable. It embraces you. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. Well, that day is today. But not because someone decided to give you a break. You built this moment with what you know. Julia lowered her eyes. She never liked compliments. It always felt like they came with an extra weight. The pressure to prove yourself all over again. I'm not even sure it's real. Sometimes it feels like we have to put on a show just to be noticed. Like we're invisible until someone important decides we're worth seeing. But today, someone did see you, Eleanor said gently. And not out of pity, but because you earned it. That hit her hard. For the first time in years, Julia felt like she didn't need to explain herself. She didn't have to justify her presence. Somehow, all the effort, all the persistence, the backpack on her shoulders and the rain on her face, they finally made sense. Eleanor stood up, walked to a side cabinet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a dark blue folder. She returned to her seat with a quiet seriousness in her posture. This company has a young talent program, she said. But I'll be honest, we've missed the mark. Most of the people who get in are recommended, already connected, or come with well-known last names. Today I realized real talent might be out there, riding a motorbike with a lunch bag strapped to the back. She handed Julia the folder. This is a formal offer. I want you on our technical team, not as an intern, but as a field technician. Fair pay, benefits, a career path. Will you accept it? Julia froze. For a few seconds, she didn't understand what she was holding. Then her eyes widened. You're serious? I've never been more serious, Eleanor replied, firm and kind. Julia took the folder with trembling hands. She read each line like someone holding a piece of a dream. Because that's what it was, a real dream. Something solid, with her name printed on it. A badge that finally said, you belong here. And in that moment, with tears slipping down her cheeks, Julia finally saw herself as whole. Real conquests often start this way. Quietly, humbly, with the scent of sweat and the taste of hope. My mom's not going to believe this, she whispered. And she has every right to be proud, Eleanor said with a warm smile. As Julia stood up to leave, she caught her reflection in the mirror behind the door. And for the first time, she saw more than a delivery worker. She saw a woman who had faced a hard life with dignity, who used faith as her compass, and who, even with the weight of the world on her shoulders, never stopped dreaming. And there was still so much ahead. Because if the factory didn't know one thing yet, it was the impact someone like her could have when finally treated like part of the team. The uniform was brand new. Her badge still smelled like freshly printed paper, and Julia woke up before her alarm even rang. She had barely slept. Anxiety wouldn't let her. She laid out her clothes the night before, brushed her hair carefully, and swapped her red backpack for a simple purse. On the outside, she looked calm, but inside it felt like a storm was about to burst. On her first day as an official employee, Julia walked through the same gate she had passed so many times as a delivery girl. Only this time, she wasn't carrying lunch. She was carrying a lifetime of effort that few had seen. Same place, same halls, same faces. But the looks, those were different now. Right at the entrance, one of the technicians who had confirmed her analysis the day of the incident greeted her with a wide smile. "Good morning, engineer." She smiled awkwardly. "I'm not an engineer yet. Don't get ahead of yourself." "Could have fooled me. You fix more than most of us," he laughed. Julia smiled again. That small comment, though casual, was more than just a compliment. It was recognition. One by one, other employees came over, some curious, others simply respectful. It was as if they finally saw her for who she really was. Not a charity case, not an exception, but someone who earned her place with sweat, knowledge, and persistence. Ms. Eleanor personally introduced her to the team and didn't hold back. "This is Julia." She didn't get in because of a connection or a last name. She's here because she fixed a machine that 20 engineers couldn't figure out. She's here because I refuse to keep overlooking real talent. The room went silent. A different kind of silence. The kind that feels heavy and healing. Julia lowered her eyes, still shy. She wasn't used to being celebrated. She came from a hard life where praise came with caution and every achievement came with doubt. But now, for the first time, she felt something new, belonging. It didn't take long for the story to spread. Through the hallways, in WhatsApp chats, around the coffee machines. The tale of the delivery girl who fixed the machine was already being told with dramatic flair. Some exaggerated, others were skeptical, but the truth was undeniable. She had done what no one else could. And this was only the beginning. Julia joined the technical team and began learning the factory's internal systems. She had a thirst, not for status, but for knowledge. She soaked up every conversation, took notes, asked questions without hesitation. She proved that talent only grows when given space. And with faith, she filled that space with grace and humility. At the end of the day, as the place slowly emptied, Julia was heading toward the front gate when something unexpected happened. Marcelo, the same engineer who had mocked her, stood there, without his tie, eyes lowered. "Julia," he said, barely above a whisper, "can I talk to you for a second?" She stopped. She was ready for anything, except this. "I came to apologize. Not just for what you did, which was incredible, but for how I treated you. I was arrogant, prejudiced, and small." Julia listened in silence. Her heart beat fast. "I've heard a lot of things, Mr. Marcelo," she replied, her voice steady. "But I have to say, the humiliation I felt here, it was one of the worst." He lowered his head. "I know, and maybe I'll never deserve your forgiveness. But I needed you to know, you taught me more in one day than most courses ever did. Not about machines, about people." Julia took a deep breath, looked him in the eye. Sometimes all we need is to be seen. He reached out his hand. She paused for a moment, but shook it, a small gesture. But in that moment, something big shifted. Marcelo stepped away in silence. And Julia, carrying years of weight on her back, felt a new kind of strength pushing her forward. Forgiveness. And the respect that comes when you survive with dignity. The following week, Julia started leading small adjustments on the production line. Her presence became natural. Her voice, heard without skepticism. The most curious thing? Other employees, including engineers, now came to her with questions. And she taught them patiently and clearly. She knew many of them were learning to unlearn. She wasn't just a technician anymore. She was a mirror, a living reminder that resilience isn't built on a stage. It's built on pavement. It's born when someone delivers food to survive and, in the process, solves what 20 men couldn't. There were many days when Julia left work feeling like she was living something she never imagined. There was no luxury, no red carpet, but there was dignity. And dignity, for those who come from the bottom, tastes like gold. She bought a new notebook, scribbled goals, wrote down processes, sketched out ideas. The badge around her neck was a symbol of achievement, but also a reminder of everything she still wanted to do. Because even now, being inside, Julia never forgot what it felt like to be on the outside. And maybe, just maybe, that was her greatest strength. In the hallways, workers smiled when they saw her. The cleaning ladies called her Dr. Julia with affection. Technicians invited her to lunch. And little by little, she became an example. Not just for her skills, but for her attitude, her listening, the calm way she carried herself. Julia didn't want to change the whole world. She just didn't want another Julia to go through what she had. And quietly, between reports, buttons, and sensors, she was already preparing what would come next. Because what the factory didn't know yet was that her name would be remembered for much more than fixing a machine. Time passed, and with it, Julia went from the delivery girl who saved the line to the tech who always gets it done. Her role in the company became solid, not as an exception, but as a reference. She wasn't the most experienced, not the most educated, but she had something rare, persistence etched into her skin, effort carved into her memory, and a hard life turned into fuel. Her reports came in clean. Her projects moved forward, and now her voice carried weight. She was consulted in technical decisions, invited to meetings that used to be for management only, and all of that without shouting, without forcing, just doing, day after day, what she had always known how to do. In the cafeteria, she no longer ate alone. Operators, engineers, assistants, they all came over, not just out of respect, but with genuine interest in what she had to say. It was like Julia carried a little piece of each one of them. Those who started from the bottom, those who hadn't been noticed yet, those carrying dreams in worn-out pockets. And maybe that's why people were drawn to her. She spoke in a way that made sense. She listened deeply, and her gaze, it was still the same as on that very first day. Sharp, cautious, but full of faith. Faith that life could, in fact, reward those who never gave up, even when everything seemed to fall apart. Her story spread far. It was shared on company bulletin boards, mentioned at corporate events, even featured in a local news story. But Julia didn't care much about that. What really mattered was being able to pay the bills on time. Seeing her mom smile when she got home without rushing. Going to the store and not having to put rice on a payment plan. Simple things. Real things. The kind that mean everything to someone who's had to live with less. Once a month, she still rode past the old delivery spots. Her helmet was new now, but the memories, they still stung. A quiet reminder that overcoming doesn't erase the past. It just gives it new meaning. The next month, she received her first full paycheck. And with it, she took her mother out to dinner. A simple restaurant, but full of meaning. She ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, just to see her mom tear up. "I always knew you'd do something big, sweetheart," her mother said, eyes shining. "Even when you came home tired, soaked from the rain, you never stopped." Julia smiled. "There were times I almost did, but something inside me always whispered, stay a little longer, it's going to work out." And it did. It was more than a job. It was the right to exist without needing to hide. At work, the training sessions she organized began to include apprentices. And she made a point to invite the quiet ones, the overlooked, the ones who didn't even know where to sit. "No one's invisible here," she would say, because talent doesn't come with a zip code or last name. It comes with willpower. And willpower is a force not everyone understands. It was the kind of thing that changed the way people looked at each other. Turned doubt into admiration. Julia no longer needed to explain who she was. She was heard. And more than that, she was a role model. The factory, once rigid in its elitist ways, was slowly beginning to open its doors to other stories of triumph. Mark, the engineer who once mocked her, had become an ally. He turned into one of the biggest advocates for including talent from technical programs and underserved communities. At an internal event, he once said, with emotion in his voice, "I was blind, and I only started to see when Julia forced me to face what was right in front of me the whole time." It wasn't easy for him to say that, but he knew he needed to. And Julia, with the calm that a hard life had taught her, just nodded. She held no grudge. Because what she carried now wasn't resentment. It was the certainty that every bit of it had been worth it. Every rejection, every delivery, every no. Sometimes when people still doubted her, because yes, it still happened, she would just smile and think back to that line she once heard in a crowded hallway. If you're so smart, then fix it. And she did. Quietly. With logic. She fixed machines, environments, and sometimes even people. Not out of pride, but because that's what she knew how to do. Persistence, for her, was second nature. It was part of how she breathed. And if she now wore a badge on her chest, it was only because once she walked with rain on her face and hunger in her belly, and never lost her dignity. Her story became a seed. It inspired other Julius. Other young girls taking apart fans in small bedrooms on the edge of town, studying through bakery Wi-Fi, making deliveries at night, and reading textbooks during the day. Girls who haven't been seen yet, but who carry the strength of a new world on their shoulders. A world where overcoming doesn't have to come with desperation, where faith and hard work aren't laughed at, where a badge is earned, not handed out. Julia knew that, and that's why she never let arrogance get to her, because she understood the world is still full of Julius, and every one of them deserves to be heard. So when a factory came back online that first day, no one imagined that more than a machine had been powered up, a movement had begun. A new cycle, a different way of seeing those who carry food on their backs, and answers in their minds that those at the top can't seem to see. Julia made it, but her victory wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who's ever been judged for how they look, where they're from, or how quiet they are. And now, the question is, how many other stories like Julia's are still waiting for a chance? Comment. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look or where you come from? Like this video if you believe talent doesn't wear a uniform. Subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience, redemption, and triumph. Every day a new story. Every day a new reason to believe.